the three deadliest plagues in the history of Rome. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the windswept coasts of Britain to the sun-scorched deserts of Syria. Over 50 million people lived under its rule. Roads connected distant provinces. Ships crossed the Mediterranean in vast numbers, carrying grain, wine, slaves, and soldiers. Rome had built the greatest empire the world had ever seen. But the very systems that made Rome powerful also made it vulnerable. The same roads that moved legions could carry invisible killers. The same ships that brought wealth could bring death. In the crowded streets of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch, where thousands lived pressed against one another in towering apartment blocks, disease found fertile ground. The Romans had no concept of germs. They could not see the pathogens that traveled in the blood of rats, in the breath of the sick, in contaminated water. They believed plagues were divine punishment sent by angry gods to chasten a fallen people. What follows is the story of three pandemics that struck the Roman world with devastating force. Each arrived without warning. Each killed on a scale that defies comprehension. Together, they helped bring down the ancient world. Plague 1, the Antonine Plague. The first came in the year 165 AD, carried home by Roman soldiers returning from campaigns in the east. It began in Mesopotamia. Roman legions, victorious against the Parthian Empire, sacked the city of Seleucia. Within weeks, soldiers began falling ill. By the time they marched back toward Roman territory, the disease traveled with them. The symptoms appeared suddenly: high fever, vomiting, diarrhea, a distinctive rash that spread across the body, often accompanied by painful pustules. The Greek physician Galen, who witnessed the outbreak firsthand, described the horror in clinical detail. Some victims coughed blood, others went blind, many died within days. Historians now believe this was smallpox, though certainty remains elusive across 2 millennia. The plague moved with terrifying speed. From the eastern provinces, it spread westward along the empire's arteries. Soldiers carried it to their garrisons. Merchants carried it to port cities. Within 2 years, it had reached Rome itself. The death toll was staggering. Ancient sources claim that 2,000 people died each day in Rome at the height of the outbreak. Modern scholars estimate that between 5 and 10 million people perished across the empire. In some regions, a quarter of the population vanished. The co-emperor Lucius Verus died of the disease in 169 AD. His funeral became a moment of collective terror as Romans wondered if the gods had abandoned them entirely. The plague ravaged the Roman military. Entire legions were decimated. The wars along the Danube frontier, already brutal, became nearly impossible to sustain. The emperor Marcus Aurelius watched his armies wither. He wrote philosophical meditations on death and fate while his empire bled. The disease burned through the Roman world for 15 years. When it finally subsided around 180 AD, Rome had changed. Economic networks had collapsed. Trade declined. The population would never fully recover. The confident, expansionist empire of the early 2nd century had been replaced by something more fragile, more haunted. The Antonine Plague marked the beginning of Rome's long decline. Plague 2, the Plague of Cyprian. Less than 70 years later, disease returned. In 249 AD, a new pestilence emerged, first recorded in Egypt before spreading throughout the empire. This time, there would be no recovery. This time, Rome was already crumbling from within. The symptoms were horrific. Cyprian, the Christian bishop of Carthage, who gave his name to the plague, documented what he witnessed. Victims suffered from continuous vomiting and diarrhea. Their eyes reddened and burned. Gangrene consumed their hands and feet. Their throats closed. Many lost their hearing. The dying filled the streets. Scholars have debated the disease's identity for centuries. Some suggest a hemorrhagic fever, similar to Ebola. Others propose measles or a form of pandemic influenza. The truth remains lost to time. What is certain is the scale of death. Ancient sources describe carts piled with corpses, mass graves dug outside city walls, families extinguished overnight. At the plague's peak, contemporary accounts claim 5,000 people died each day in Rome alone. But the true devastation was not merely physical. the plague of Cyprian struck an empire already in crisis. The 3rd century was an age of chaos. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession, murdered by their own soldiers. Barbarian tribes pressed against the frontiers. Civil wars consumed provinces. The economy spiraled into collapse. Into this darkness came disease. Cities emptied. Agricultural production plummeted as farmers died in their fields. The military, already stretched thin, lost thousands more men. Tax revenues vanished. The machinery of imperial government ground toward halt. The psychological impact proved equally catastrophic. Traditional Roman religion, which promised divine favor in exchange for proper rituals, seemed powerless. The old gods had failed. In the ruins of certainty, new faiths flourished. Christianity, which offered comfort to the suffering and promised salvation beyond death, gained converts by the thousands. Cyprian himself would be martyred in 258 AD, beheaded during the persecutions of Emperor Valerian. But his faith survived him. The plague that bore his name helped transform the religious landscape of the empire. The disease finally receded around 262 AD. It left behind a world permanently altered. The classical Roman civilization of Augustus and Trajan was gone. What emerged from the ashes would be poorer, more militarized, more desperate, and more Christian. Plague 3, the Plague of Justinian. The final blow came in 541 AD, when the Roman Empire had been reborn as Byzantium. Emperor Justinian, determined to restore Rome's ancient glory, had reconquered North Africa and Italy. Constantinople glittered as the greatest city on earth, home to 500,000 souls. The future seemed bright. Then ships from Egypt arrived carrying grain for the capital's population. Hidden in their holds, among the sacks and barrels, rats carried fleas. The fleas carried death. The plague of Justinian was bubonic plague, the same disease that would ravage medieval Europe as the Black Death 8 centuries later. It announced itself with swellings in the groin, armpits and neck, the infamous buboes that gave the disease its name. Fever followed, delirium, then death, often within days. The historian Procopius witnessed the catastrophe firsthand. He described bodies stacked like cordwood, towers filled with corpses, ships loaded with the dead and pushed out to sea. At the plague's height, he claimed 10,000 people died each day in Constantinople alone. The disease moved with the trade routes Justinian had worked so hard to protect. From Constantinople, it spread through the Mediterranean. It reached Syria, Palestine, North Africa, Italy. It penetrated inland, following rivers and roads. Some regions lost half their population. Justinian himself contracted the plague and survived, one of the fortunate few. But his dreams of restoration died with his people. The reconquest of the West stalled and ultimately failed. The armies he needed could not be raised. The taxes he required could not be collected. The plague of Justinian would return in waves for the next 2 centuries, striking generation after generation. Modern estimates suggest that between 25 and 50 million people died across the Mediterranean world and beyond. It was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. When the plague finally exhausted itself in the 8th century, it left behind a transformed world. The great cities of antiquity had shrunk to shadows. Trade networks had collapsed. Learning and literacy declined. The classical civilization that had endured for over a millennium was gone. In its place came the medieval world, darker and smaller, but also the seed of something new. 3 plagues, 3 cataclysms. Together, they killed tens of millions and reshaped the course of Western civilization. The Roman Empire did not fall to barbarians alone. It was not merely political corruption or military defeat that ended classical antiquity. Disease played a role as significant as any army, any emperor, any ideology. The plagues revealed the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. They demonstrated that empires built on trade and connectivity carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. They showed that the invisible world can be more dangerous than any visible enemy. Rome built monuments that still stand. Its laws still echo in modern legal systems. Its language shaped the tongues of nations. But Rome, for all its power, could not defeat the microscopic organisms that traveled in the blood and breath of its people. The plagues that struck Rome changed everything, and the echoes of that ancient suffering still resound today.